Senjumaru's Bankai might not be as overwhelming as many assume. The unfortunate reality is, we still don't fully understand its true capabilities. But based on what we've seen, we can start piecing the puzzle together. One of the most accepted interpretations is that her countless arms symbolize the many realms she governs with her Bankai, almost like pocket dimensions where she reigns supreme. But rather than destroying her enemies, she seals them within these realms. The design of each room seems to reflect a destined outcome for the opponent, trapping them within a future they cannot escape. This suggests there could be a weakness, maybe even a countermeasure, hidden within her power. Yes, it's an ability potent enough to shake the balance of the three worlds. But as far as raw destructive power goes, there's nothing confirming it matches the sheer devastation of Yamamoto's Bankai. Now here's something you might not know. Hollow Zangetsu might have cared for Ichigo just as deeply, if not more, than his Quincy half. Remember the battle with Ulquiorra? Orihimi's voice reached Ichigo, but he was so overwhelmed that he lost control. That's when his hollow side took over, not out of selfish desire, but to avenge Ichigo. He didn't just aim to win, he wanted to destroy Ulquiorra completely, make him feel every bit of that fury. And judging by his performance, he wasn't even going full throttle. Which begs the question, just how terrifying was Vasto Lord Ichigo at full power? Speaking of mysteries, Aizen's Bankai remains one of the greatest unknowns in Bleach. We've never seen it, and we don't even know if he truly possesses one. But fans have plenty of theories. Some believe he's already used it and disguised its effects using Kyokusugetsu. Others argue that activating his Bankai would negate the hypnosis of his shikai, which would make perfect sense given how delicate reality-bending powers usually are. One of the most fascinating ideas, though, is that his Bankai lets him manipulate events themselves, perhaps allowing him to set a save point in time or even alter future outcomes. With how much of the story he's influenced, that wouldn't be too far-fetched. So, which theory do you think hits closest to the truth? Here's another hidden gem. Yoruichi might be the reason Urahara became Soul Society's greatest genius. As childhood friends, they spent a lot of time together. Urahara wasn't likely born into a prestigious family, at least not one anywhere near the Shihoin clan's status, which Yoruichi belonged to. She had access to secrets and advanced knowledge due to her noble upbringing, and it's possible she passed some of that down to Kisuke. If she chose him as her first student, it would explain how his obsession with science and innovation was sparked in the first place. What do you think? Does this theory feel right? Or do you see another path that led Kisuke to greatness? Now let's talk about Urahara's Bankai. Yes, it's crazy powerful. His ability allows him to disassemble and rebuild anything within his range, including living bodies, even his own. During the fight against Askin, he even reconstructed barriers and opened a sort of dimensional passage. It's a terrifying technique, but not without drawbacks. Its reach is limited, its effects aren't permanent, and it can't impact the soul. That last point is why he couldn't repair Ichibe's Bankai, but there was one person who could fix a shattered Bankai. When Yhwach claimed Yamamoto was weak, he didn't mean physically. The old Captain Commander still possessed overwhelming power. What Yhwach was really saying is that Yamamoto had softened. He no longer had the ruthless edge that once made him truly terrifying. He held back, restrained the full force of his Bankai, and wouldn't sacrifice allies for victory. Now imagine this. What if Yamamoto had actually faced the real Yhwach, not Royd Lloyd, and Yhwach wasn't allowed to use the medallion? Could Yamamoto have won if he gave everything? Realistically, no. Even going all out, Yhwach had too many advantages this time. Still, even if Yamamoto didn't lose outright, he'd likely suffer heavy damage, which would derail his future efforts. Yhwach simply made the smarter move. There's long been debate about whether Ulquiorra in his Segunda Etapa form was more powerful than Stark. Let's break it down. Ulquiorra effortlessly dominated Ichigo even before transforming fully, so it's difficult to gauge just how powerful his second release actually is. But Ichigo also had trouble with Grimmjow before that, which muddies the waters. Meanwhile, Stark held his own against two captains and two viceroys. Yes, they were split fights, and his opponents didn't use their Bankai, but it's still an impressive showing. Given all that, Stark's performance stands out more. His speed and Sero techniques give him a serious edge. While Ulquiorra showed off some of the most devastating attacks among the Espada, raw power alone isn't everything. In a straight duel, Stark likely takes the win. Does Yoruichi have a Zanpakuto and a Bankai? Yes, she absolutely does, but she rarely, if ever, uses them. That's because she's created her own unique combat style. By blending Hakuda, hand-to-hand fighting, with Kido, she developed a technique known as Shunko. It's an intense, close-range style that fuses raw physicality with spiritual energy. Yoruichi's version channels lightning, and through relentless training, She pushed it even further into a deadly form known as God of Thunder. We've seen glimpses of it in the manga, and let's be honest, we're all counting down the days until we see it brought to life in animation. One of Bleach's most bafflingly inconsistent characters has to be Chojiro Sasakibe, the First Division's lieutenant. Here we have a man who possessed a Bankai, something rare for someone of his rank, and was considered skilled enough to earn the title of captain. Yet, he deliberately chose to remain at Yamamoto's side as his loyal subordinate. He once stood shoulder to shoulder with the elite captains of the previous generation, arguably the strongest lineup in Soul Society's history. His Bankai was even powerful enough to scar Yamamoto's forehead, a remarkable feat. But then, there's this glaring contradiction. Chojiro was effortlessly defeated by Ichigo, who at the time had barely been a Shinigami and didn't even use a weapon, just his bare hands. This raises the question, was Chojiro a heavy hitter solely reliant on his Bankai, but completely outclassed in close quarters combat? What do you think? So how powerful was Gremmy really? There's a lot to unpack here, and several mysteries still linger, but let's try to break it down. Gremmy boldly claimed to be the strongest among the Sternritter, but in reality, he wasn't. Members of the Schutzstaffel, the highest echelon of Sternritter, consistently demonstrated greater feats. That said, Gremmy's abilities were frightening. His imagination-based powers allowed him to create, destroy, repair, and replicate anything he could think of. When Kenpachi defeated him, Gremmy didn't blame a lack of strength. He admitted that his imagination was his downfall, not his power. His greatest weakness was his own mind. If we accept that his abilities truly had no boundaries, then in theory, mastering his imagination would make him nearly invincible. Sure, there might be some limits to his power, but let's be honest. When someone can casually summon a country-sized meteor, those limits hardly matter against most foes. This could also be why he never activated his Vollständig. His power was already so complete that it didn't need any enhancements. The only constraint was the scope of his own mind. Ever wondered how Ichigo and Urahara managed to unlock Bankai so quickly? Urahara reached it in 3 days, while Ichigo did it in just 2. Both relied on a method involving Tenshintai, a device Urahara invented that forces the spirit of Zanpakuto and Fest, accelerating the Bankai training process. So, does that mean anyone can get Bankai in a few days with this method? Not really. Most people simply don't have the potential. Even among those who do, it's unlikely they could replicate Urahara's success. The man's a genius. He probably could have achieved Bankai through regular training in a few short years. As for Ichigo, yes, he did it faster. But technically, what he unlocked wasn't his true Bankai. The old man's Zangetsu was actually the manifestation of his Quincy powers, not his real Zanpakuto spirit. So while Ichigo did manage to access a form of Bankai, it was more like a hybrid, a fusion of partial Zanpakuto control and Quincy abilities. A pseudo-Bankai, if you will. Why did Yhwach choose Uryu as his successor? There are 2 main reasons behind that decision. First, Uryu survived the Auswahlen, an event that drains Quincy of their powers. This survival hinted at an unknown ability within him, which naturally piqued Yhwach's curiosity. No one fully understands why Uryu was immune. One theory suggests he was born with a latent form of antithesis, a power that allows him to reverse outcomes. Second, Yhwach wanted to keep a close eye on him. Uryu's connection to Ichigo and his unpredictable nature made him a potential threat. And as the old saying goes, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Did you know the Issei family is bound by a deadly curse? Lieutenant Nanao Issei is the only named member of the clan, but their background holds some chilling secrets. For starters, Nanao's mother married Shunsui Kyoraku's brother, which technically makes her and Shunsui relatives. Unlike other Shinigami families, the Issei clan doesn't have personal Zanpakuto. Instead, they possess a sacred blade called the Hakyoken, a family relic akin to those held by noble houses. This weapon grants divine-level power, but it comes at a terrible cost. It gradually drains the user's Reiatsu until they surrender it or die. But that's just part of the curse. The Issei lineage has only ever produced female heirs. Men must marry into the family, and without exception, every man who has entered the clan dies young, regardless of whether they remain in the family. This tragic pattern is now known as the East Curse. Where did Yhwach come from, and how was he born? You've probably wondered about this at some point. He's said to be the son of the Soul King, but the origin story ends there. One theory that seems absurd on the surface might actually hold weight once you spot the obvious clue. Yhwach's name bears a striking resemblance to Yahweh, the name for God in the Jewish faith. He's also about 2,000 years old. A divine son, 2,000 years old. Sound familiar? Could Kubo have modeled Yhwach after Jesus himself? Now for the theory. Perhaps a fragment of the Soul King's essence broke away and entered the human world, merging with a woman's body. If you know your biblical stories, the Virgin Mary connection is hard to miss. Which leads to the next curiosity. If Kubo ever introduced her in the manga, what name would he give her? What does it take to become a Soul Reaper in Bleach? Some are born into it, like Byakuya, Yoruichi, and Soifon, who come from noble bloodlines. But what about the others? Those who weren't born into power? In Bleach's world, soul society functions like the afterlife, where souls go after death. However, not every soul is eligible to become a Soul Reaper. The key factor is spiritual pressure, also known as Reiatsu. Most souls don't have any, and they live out eternity in peace. But those born with Reiatsu face a tougher road. They require food, rest, and survival skills, unlike regular souls. Finding sustenance in soul society isn't easy. For them, the options are limited. Try to become a Soul Reaper and hope to succeed, or end up in one of the outer, impoverished districts, struggling to survive until death comes again. Why does Mayuri Kurotsuchi look the way he does? He's always covered in elaborate face paint or bizarre masks, and throughout the series, he switches up his look more than once. But the real shocker comes in episode 61, when we finally catch a glimpse of his actual face for the first time. And it's nothing like you'd expect. So, what's with all the makeup and masks? While there's no official explanation yet, some theories offer pretty solid logic. The most convincing one? Mayuri simply doesn't value his body. He treats it like a disposable lab instrument, leaving scars from experiments and even amputating parts when necessary. His strange appearance seems to be a psychological strategy, warping how people perceive him. It's meant to intrigue, confuse, and unsettle. And in combat, or even casual encounters, it gives him a mental edge. Or maybe he just has insane fashion sense. Did you know the 8th Kenpachi, Saya Asashiro, had one of the most overpowered Bankai abilities in Bleach history? He lived during a brutal era of soul society, one where noble families were constantly fighting for dominance. Saya tragically witnessed the murder of his own sister, an event that triggered the awakening of his Zanpakuto's spirit. And believe it or not, his Zanpakuto was always in its Bankai state. This Bankai lets Saya merge with the environment itself. We're talking air, water, earth, everything. He could fly, become invisible, turn invulnerable, shape weapons out of his surroundings, even suffocate enemies by manipulating the oxygen around them. It was pure madness. Worse yet, the range of his power extended across all of Seireitai, an area roughly the size of a mid-sized country. During his fight with the 7th Kenpachi Kuruyashiki, even Kuruyashiki's subordinate accused Saya of using cheap tricks. But the truth? Saya was literally killing him from within using his Bankai. And Rakyoten is one of the most dangerous Zanpakuto ever created, an ancient weapon classified as a Shinken. We previously explored Shinken, and like that one, and Rakyoten possesses divine-level abilities. This blade belonged to the prestigious Tsunayashiro clan, and at first, it appeared to merely reflect incoming attacks. But that was only when it was partially released. Once fully activated, Rakyoten shed its physical form and granted its wielder the power to mimic any Zanpakuto they had seen or understood, copying both the appearance and abilities. However, its effectiveness depends entirely on the strength of the user. A weak user will replicate only weak versions of those powers. There's also a dark side, just like Hukyoten of the Issa clan, and Rakyoten gradually devours the user's soul every time it's used. Why didn't Ichigo lose his Quincy powers during Yhwach's Ausweilen? And honestly, there's no canon answer. But here's one possible theory. Maybe Ichigo's hollow powers disrupted the effects of Ausweilen. We know Quincy's are naturally vulnerable to hollows, so Ichigo's hybrid nature might have countered Yhwach's ability. Still, that theory's a bit shaky. Quincy's weakness to hollows is more spiritual than technical. It's not a confirmed explanation, and I'd genuinely love to hear your theories in the comments too. Bleach's power scaling confuses a lot of fans, but there's one key detail people often overlook. Back in the Soul Society arc, Ichigo held his own against Byakuya, a captain who was always one of the strongest. Then in Hueco Mundo, he easily beat Espada 7, but only after wasting time showing off. Byakuya, on the other hand, had a harder time dealing with the Espada, even when fighting seriously. So what gives? Well, after the Soul Society arc, Ichigo used a combat pass to access his Shinigami form, which may have suppressed his full power. Though not exact, this kind of limit is similar to the restriction captains face in the human world, dropping their power to around 20% or so. If Ichigo was dealing with something like that, it would explain the apparent power jumps across arcs. He wasn't necessarily getting stronger, he was just gradually returning to the monster he already was. Jinjo wasn't just a villain, he was a victim. According to the light novels, Ukitake genuinely meant well when he gave Ginjo a combat pass. But behind the scenes, a nobleman named Tokunada Tsunayashiro twisted everything. He ordered the pass be used to spy on Ginjo and control his powers. Worse, Tokunada later targeted Ginjo's Fullbringer allies, hoping to extract fragments of the Soul King within them. When Soul Society assassins came to eliminate his friends, Ginjo fought back and killed them. But he was then framed for murdering both the assassins and his comrades. They claimed he went rogue after learning he was being monitored. That lie gave Ginjo his villain label, and explains his deep hatred towards Soul Society. It doesn't excuse what he did to Ichigo, but it makes his story a lot more tragic and honestly, way more compelling. Why didn't Rukia recognize Isshin while staying at the Kurosaki household? It's puzzling. Isshin was a captain during her time in the Gotei 13, and her squad's lieutenant was none other than Kaien Shiba, his nephew. You'd think she'd know who he was. Here's the deal. Isshin looked completely different back then. He didn't have a beard, and appeared much younger, drastically altering his appearance. Plus, if Rukia had only seen him a few times years ago, it would be easy to forget, or at least not connect the dots. At best, maybe she thought he looked vaguely familiar, but brushed it off. After all, it's not every day you expect a Soul Reaper to age that fast, or be hiding out in the human world. There's a theory about the Hogyoku that surprisingly holds a lot of weight. We know that the Hogyoku is essentially a wish-fulfilling device. Interestingly, this bears a strong resemblance to the ability of Gerard Valkyrie, who happens to be the Soul King's heart. Gerard's power, the miracle, allows him to transform thoughts, his own and those of others around him, into physical miracles. Now here's where it gets interesting. The theory suggests that the Hogyoku was intentionally designed to mimic the Soul King's heart. That would also explain why it requires an immense number of souls to operate. However, unlike Gerard's literal miracle-making, the Hogyoku doesn't work quite that way. It acts more like an advanced accelerator. It doesn't hand out powers you never had. Instead, it fast-tracks the process of achieving what you're already capable of. Take Bankai, for example. You need the latent potential to unlock one. The Hogyoku won't create that power from thin air. It just speeds up the journey if it's already possible for you. Now let's talk about Gin Ichimaru, one of the most underrated characters in Bleach. Early on, he was seen as insanely powerful. But after the Arrancar arc, most people stopped ranking him among the elites. Sure, others have far more jaw-dropping feats, but what fans often overlook is that Gin was an absolute prodigy. His raw strength, Kido expertise, and swordsmanship weren't necessarily top tier, but his speed and battle intellect were outstanding. And let's not forget his Zanpakuto. His shikai could extend up to 100 times its length at blinding speed and hit with devastating force. That alone is wild. But his Bankai? If it made direct contact, it was practically an instant kill. If Gin had kept honing his abilities, I firmly believe he would have rivaled heavy hitters like Toshiro and Byakuya during the 1,000-year Blood War. Then there's the 7th Kenpachi, one of the most terrifying Soul Reapers ever. Kuruyashiki was said to be the only Kenpachi whose bloodlust could match Zaraki's. He was so powerful that he was offered a spot in Squad 0, but he turned it down. He didn't want to sit around waiting for the fight to come to him. Although the 8th Kenpachi took him down quickly, even Soya Asashiro acknowledged that things would have gone differently if Kuruyashiki had unleashed his Bankai. And for good reason. His Bankai was so lethal, it was banned in the Soul Society. When activated, giant jaws would erupt from the ground, consuming everything, living or non-living, friend or foe, except Kuruyashiki himself. Yes, it's exactly as overpowered as it sounds. But there's a catch. It can't be used again for 6 months, likely due to the immense energy it consumes. Now, let's talk about the original Gotei 13. What happened to them? Truth is, we don't really know. What we do know is that they weren't noble defenders like their name implied. They were actually the most dangerous criminals in Soul Society, brutal killers who had no hesitation about cutting anyone down. That's also what made them so fearsome. Raw, ruthless power with no moral compass. Kubo really teased us with their insane designs, only to give us the bare minimum. As for their fate, theories suggest they may have died in action, succumbed to illness, or were even taken out by Yamamoto or Unohana themselves. And with the latest anime season, we now know they're all gone. Ever wondered how Sato Yasutora got the nickname Chad? We all know Ichigo was the one who gave it to him, but the reason behind it actually makes sense. Sato's name in kanji uses 2 characters, one for T and the other for crossing over. Put together, they're read as Chado. In the subbed version of the anime, Ichigo calls him that directly. But in the English dub it was romanized into Chad. I used to think it had something to do with his appearance too, but nope, it's all in the kanji. Now here's my personal ranking of the 5 most powerful Bankai in Bleach. Coming in at number 5 is Shunsui's Bankai, a deadly ability that pretty much guarantees a kill. The catch? His Zanpakuto. Spirit has to feel like fighting. Number 4 is Urahara. His Bankai lets him take anything apart and put it back together. It's absurdly broken. And while the range is limited, Urahara's intellect more than makes up for it. At number 3, we have Senjumaru. Her Bankai was revealed recently in the anime, and it's one of the most potent we've ever seen. Some fans argue it surpasses Zanka no Tachi, though I still think that's a stretch. Speaking of which, Yamamoto's Zanka no Tachi takes second place. This weapon is powerful enough to obliterate all of Soul Society. No further explanation needed. And at number 1, Ichibe's Bankai. This ability lets him rename anything or anyone, and in doing so, completely rewrite their existence. It's a god-level power. If you disagree, that's totally fine. Drop your own rankings in the comments. Now let's talk about Masaki Kurosaki. Just how powerful was she? She took down White, a threat Isshin would have needed to use Bankai against, with a single hit. At first glance, this makes her seem equal to, or even stronger than, Isshin. But hold on. Remember, Isshin was in the human world at the time, meaning he was limited by Gentai Kaijo, which suppresses a captain's power. Without that restriction, he could have likely defeated White just using his shikai. Still, Masaki's feat is incredibly impressive. To be compared to a captain-class Soul Reaper is no small thing. While most consider her lieutenant level, I'd argue she was at least on the lower end of captain level. White didn't seem like someone a regular lieutenant could take out in one shot. But hey, what do you think? Who is Ichigo's truest and most devoted friend? Let's set Orihime aside for this one. That leaves us with 4 contenders: Chad, Rukia, Renji, and Uryu. Now, in terms of life-changing influence, Rukia stands out immediately. The connection she shares with Ichigo is deep. They've saved each other time and again. Their bond quite literally shaped the path both of them walk today. While Renji and Uryu are undeniably close to Ichigo, they don't quite reach that number 1 spot for me. Chad, on the other hand, has had some of the most powerful ride-or-die moments with Ichigo. And although these moments became fewer later in the story, the depth of their loyalty never seemed to fade. Honestly, I'd even argue that Chad is the most loyal friend Ichigo has. Now before you object, let me clarify. Yes, Rukia would absolutely lay down her life for Ichigo, no question. But when push comes to shove, if it involved the Soul Society or her noble family, I believe she'd have to weigh those factors before choosing a side. Chad? I can't picture him ever choosing anything or anyone over Ichigo. That kind of unwavering loyalty, where logic takes a back seat, is what really makes him stand out. Still, I think it's fair to say both Chad and Rukia share the top spot for different, but equally powerful reasons. What's the difference between Reishi and Reiryoku, and where does Reiatsu come in? It's actually more straightforward than it seems. Reishi is the spiritual substance that forms all things in the spiritual realms, like the buildings in Soul Society, or the desert and trees in Hueco Mundo. If it's spiritual in nature, it's made of Reishi. To understand Reiatsu, we need to talk about Reiryoku first. Reiryoku is the spiritual energy that a soul possesses. Basically, their inner power source. Reiatsu, or spiritual pressure, is how much of that energy they release outward. In simple terms, Reiryoku is how much power you have, and Reiatsu is how much power you let others feel. Think of a Shinigami's attack like Ichigo's Getsuga Tensho. That comes from Reiryoku. The pressure others feel when that power is released into the world? That's Reiatsu. What's the weakest Bankai in Bleach? There are a few contenders, but the one that comes to mind first is Ikaku's Bankai. At a glance, it sounds promising. It grows stronger the longer the fight drags on. But when you break it down, it's riddled with weaknesses. It's fragile, slow to ramp up, and capped in how much it can actually boost his strength. Compared to most other Bankais that offer either overwhelming force or hacks tier abilities, Ikaku's feels more like a powered-up shikai than a true Bankai. Yes, it's a fledgling Bankai, but even as a beginner level, it struggles to hold up. You could also throw Renji's original Bankai into this conversation, but at least his provided a bit more tactical variety. Still, Ikaku's is likely the weakest of the bunch. Did you know there's a secret ritual after a captain dies? In the very first Bleach episode, we're introduced to the Kanso, a soul burial ritual performed to send lost spirits from the human world to Soul Society. But for captains, there's a ceremonial version done 12 years after their funeral, known as Kanso Risai. During this event, hollows are defeated in front of the fallen captain's grave, so that their reishi can supposedly be recycled back into Soul Society. Except, that's a lie. That version is just what the Soul Reaper Academy teaches. In truth, the ceremony is a method for casting powerful souls into hell. Why? Because any spirit ranked class 3 or higher has Reiatsu so dense that their soul can't be naturally reabsorbed into Soul Society. If left unchecked, this could be catastrophic. For context, Spirit class is a ranking system based on Reiatsu levels, from class 20, lowest, to class 1, highest. Captains typically fall within Class 3 or higher, which is why this hidden ritual is reserved for them. Did Royd Lloyd have help fighting Yamamoto? Royd's ability, the Yourself, lets him copy not just appearance, but also the personality and memories of his target, explaining how Yamamoto was fooled into thinking he was facing Yhwach himself. But unlike his brother Lloyd, Royd can't imitate a person's power, only their knowledge and combat experience. So while he could mimic Yhwach's style and technique, he couldn't fully wield his abilities. Yet even so, Royd held his own impressively. And here's something often overlooked. Royd might not have been fighting alone. Enter Jugram Hashwalth. His ability, the Balance, can swap the fortune of others, meaning that Royd's bad luck might have been exchanged for Yamamoto's good luck. That's an incredibly overpowered ability, and it could explain how Royd managed to survive for so long. Maybe Royd really was just that strong. But with Hashwalth possibly tipping the scales, the odds weren't as one-sided as they seemed. Is Shinji's shikai more useful than his Bankai? Shinji's shikai releases a mist that, when inhaled, flips all the senses. Left becomes right, up is down, front is back. Even if someone wanted to adapt, their reflexes would betray them. It completely disrupts muscle memory, leaving even elite fighters helpless. It's easily one of the most disorienting and powerful shikais in the Bleach universe. Now his Bankai? It goes a step further. It alters the target's perception of ally and enemy, causing them to attack their own teammates. Sounds powerful, right? Well, here's the catch. It's unusable around allies. So while the Bankai is devastating in the right conditions, the shikai can be deployed more often and still deliver near-identical results. The only major difference is that with the shikai, Shinji has to land the finishing blows himself, whereas with the Bankai, the enemies do it for him. But the overall effort? Not all that different, which makes his shikai arguably just as, if not more, practical. Why doesn't Ichigo use his hollow mask anymore? Here's the real reason. To understand this, we need to rewind back to the Fullbring arc. Fullbringers are essentially humans with hollow-influenced abilities. After undergoing Fullbring training, Ichigo reached a point where he no longer needs to wear the mask to tap into his hollow powers. Those abilities are now passively integrated with his Soul Reaper skills, something you can clearly observe through his appearance. In the 1000-Year Blood War arc, his outfit takes on a whiter hue, closely resembling hollowification. Compare this with his pre-Fullbring attire, and the difference becomes evident. The more of his hollow energy Ichigo channels, the more it reflects externally, which culminates in his Horn of Salvation form, essentially an evolved version of his mask. Remember, Ichigo is still learning to control his full power, especially with the blend of his Quincy, Hollow, and Shinigami sides. There's still untapped potential within him. What happens to Quincy's after death? The series never directly answers this, but if you piece together scattered lore, you'll find the answer. First, let's define what a Quincy is. They can be humans like Uryu, or spiritual beings like those from the Vandenreich. Humans upon death go to Soul Society, Hell, or Hueco Mundo, depending on circumstances. As for souls, they're typically reincarnated into the human world, unless their Reiatsu is too dense, in which case they're sent to Hell. Quincy's follow these same rules, though Hueco Mundo doesn't apply to them. Yes, a fragment of their power is linked to Yhwach and returns to him upon death, but he didn't create their souls. That's why they still follow the natural cycle of life and death like everyone else. Here's why Senjumaru's Bankai didn't appear in the manga. To explain this, we need to revisit what happened in the source material. In the manga, events closely mirror the anime up until the Bankai moment. After that, the story jumps straight to Squad Zero lying defeated without showing their full potential. So, why does the manga offer less detail than the anime? At the time, Kubo was under tight deadlines and pressure, forcing him to rush certain arcs. Now, as the chief supervisor of the 1000-Year Blood War anime, Kubo is taking the opportunity to expand, replace, and enhance scenes he couldn't flesh out before. Not only does this enrich the experience for viewers, but it also makes these additions officially canon. So, even if you've read the manga, the anime is absolutely worth watching moving forward. Expect more, never-before-seen content. Did you catch what Urahara did in episode 14 of the anime? Back in the early series, Uryu challenged Ichigo to see who could slay more hollows. Most of us remember that challenge vividly, especially the moment when Menos Grande appeared. When I first saw it, Menos felt like an overwhelming threat, especially given how seriously Rukia spoke of it. Later, we discover Aizen was the one who sent the Menos to Karakura town to accelerate his hybrid experiment. During that moment, Urahara tells Ichigo to take on the Menos while he handles the weaker hollows. At first glance, this seems unremarkable, but knowing Urahara's strength and foresight, it raises questions. Truth is, Urahara likely recognized the situation and Aizen's involvement. Rather than expose himself and alert Aizen, he let Ichigo gain experience while subtly playing along with Aizen's plan. After all, Urahara always intended for Ichigo to face Aizen eventually. That's why he put so much effort into his development. Did you know Ichigo isn't the only character to use Mugetsu in Bleach? Roka Paramya, an Arrancar who appears briefly in the anime, plays a far bigger role in the light novel Spirits Are Forever With You. Created by Sailaporo from Fused Souls, Roka was designed as an artificial Menos Grande. Inspired by Azashiro's power to merge with the environment, Sael gave Roka an ability called Backup, allowing her to scatter Negation threads across Hueco Mundo and beyond, gathering data. After her head was crushed by Yami, she used those threads to reconstruct herself, though the process takes time. In her resurrection state, Roka can mimic any ability she's recorded, although each replication is imperfect and damages her body depending on the power's intensity. One of her most shocking copied abilities? Mugetsu. She used it effectively enough to seriously wound Saiyan's Sung Sun, proving just how dangerously powerful her skill set is. Who would win, Shunsui or Byakuya? Matchups like this are always open to debate, and unless Kubo gives a definitive answer, there's no way to settle it. Still, it's fun to imagine. Assuming both are fully unleashed and aware of each other's Bankai abilities, let's analyze. They're on par when it comes to intelligence, but Shunsui holds an edge in battle experience, raw talent, and his willingness to fight dirty if needed. Byakuya's sense of pride can occasionally hinder him. That said, Senbonzakura's versatility could pose a serious challenge to Shunsui, and Byakuya's sharp mind would help him hold out against the trickery of Shunsui's games, for a while. If it were a shikai-only duel, Byakuya might have a shot, but most times Shunsui would walk away the victor. Once Bankai enters the fray, the fight becomes far more one-sided. Katen Kyokotsu. Karamatsu Shinju is a Bankai few can survive, even someone as powerful as Byakuya. Why didn't Old Man Zangetsu awaken Ichigo's Quincy side? As the story unfolds, we discover that the Zangetsu we knew wasn't the real one, but a manifestation of Ichigo's Quincy powers. Surprisingly, he wasn't supportive of Ichigo becoming a Soul Reaper. But the deeper truth is, he wasn't keen on Ichigo embracing his Quincy powers either. Why? Because he wanted to protect Ichigo from the dangers both paths brought. If you go back to episode 19, the signs were already there. Zangetsu was hesitant, even resistant, to let Ichigo tap into that world of power. But with Urahara's drastic method to reignite Ichigo's abilities, Zangetsu had no real option but to go along. So then, why didn't he just let Ichigo awaken as a Quincy instead of a Shinigami? There are really only two logical explanations. 1. As Yhwach later reveals in the Thousand-Year Blood War, Ichigo's Quincy abilities were likely lying too deep, too inactive to be used. 2. It might have been related to his hollow powers. Quincy and hollow energy clash like fire and ice, and Ichigo was undergoing hollowification at the time. Not only would his Quincy powers have been ineffective in that moment, they might have actually made things far worse. How did Bazz-B, As-Not, and Na survive Yamamoto's flames? Despite getting scorched by one of the most powerful Shinigami in Bleach history, we see these stern ridders alive and active later on. So what exactly happened? Did they just tank Yamamoto's flames and walk it off? Highly doubtful. Few, if any, can endure even the base form of his shikai without turning to ash. The anime glossed over it, but the manga gives us a real answer. During Bazz-B's battle with Toshiro, he casually mentions that he managed to counter the Captain Commander's fire, which is how he, As-Not, and Na survived. Still, what's puzzling is the confidence with which he says it, like it was some minor trick. But the truth? As-Not was seen being incinerated, and Bazz-B looked like he had just crawled out of a furnace by the end of it. So yeah, they lived, but it definitely wasn't a walk in the park. How does Fullbring actually function in Bleach? To manifest a Fullbring, your mother must be attacked by a hollow while she's pregnant with you. During that attack, the fetus absorbs trace amounts of hollow Ryoryoku. However, in the cases of Chad and Orihime, their powers seem to have been triggered differently, by absorbing Ichigo's spiritual energy, along with the Hogyoku either awakening or accelerating their abilities. There's another crucial piece from the Bleach light novels. All Fullbringers are said to carry fragments of the Soul King within them. So here's how it fits together. Those fragments seem to draw hollows in, which is likely why the mother is attacked in the first place. When that happens, the Soul King shard inside the child absorbs the hollow's energy. That means any similar encounter involving a shard and hollow Ryoryoku could unlock Fullbring potential. The awakening process differs from person to person. Some might never activate their powers at all. The Hogyoku, with its wish-fulfilling nature, can either grant Fullbring abilities or drastically speed up their awakening. Which brings us back to Orihime and Chad. It's unclear whether their powers come from Soul King shards or are purely the result of the Hogyoku's influence. Did you know someone reached Bankai before even joining the Gotei 13? Most Soul Reapers never even come close to unlocking their Bankai in a lifetime. For perspective, many Shinigami don't even have shikai before they step into the Gotei 13. So who's the rare prodigy that defied all odds? Hitsugaya Toshiro. Though he's often praised for his intelligence, what really sets him apart is how fast he developed in battle. He managed to unlock Bankai before officially becoming a squad member, a feat that elevates him far above most of his peers. It's even more remarkable considering he was made a captain over Rangiku after Isshin's departure, despite her higher rank at the time. Technically, there's one other character who achieved Bankai before entering the Gotei 13. And if you're a true Bleach fan, you already know who that is. Was Ichigo's hollow side active during his fight with Renji? During Urahara's training, we witness Ichigo going through hollowification for what many believe is the first time. But there's a compelling theory suggesting his hollow powers actually surfaced earlier, during his initial battle with Renji. At that moment, Ichigo's spiritual pressure surged dramatically, and his combat instincts kicked into overdrive. Sure, it could be explained by adrenaline, resolve, or Zangetsu's help, but if you rewatch the scene with the knowledge we have now, the signs suggest something else, something darker. Ichigo seemed to lose control, overwhelmed with fury, which is out of character for him unless his hollow self is involved. And if you recall what Old Man Zangetsu confessed in the Thousand-Year Blood War, it was never him stepping in to save Ichigo in life-threatening situations. It was always White, his inner hollow. Hisagi's Bankai is one of Bleach's most underrated powers. Before we even talk about his Bankai, let's appreciate what Hisagi's shikai evolved into. The real strength isn't in the dual scythes, it's in the chains. Those chains can heal any wound he suffers, as long as he still has spiritual energy left. Essentially, he becomes unkillable. Honestly, it might be one of the strongest shikai in the entire series. I'd easily put it in the top 5. Now, onto his Bankai. Once activated, both Hisagi and his opponent are trapped inside a chain-forged dome, forcing a brutal one-on-one duel. The enemy is restrained by chains that sap their Reiryoku, and every injury, on both sides, is healed using energy drawn from them. This creates a horrifying cycle of mutual regeneration and violence, where both fighters are locked in a battle of attrition until they completely drain their energy and collapse. It's poetic, savage, and definitely one of the most unique Bankai concepts ever shown. Just how powerful is Ukitake? Really? Let's try to unpack this without diving too deep into spoilers, especially for anime-only fans, since Ukitake still plays a major role in the Thousand-Year Blood War arc. So, what do we already know? Captain Commander Yamamoto himself acknowledged Ukitake and Shunsui as equals. Considering Shunsui ranks as the second strongest captain right after Yama, this puts Ukitake in a seriously elite class. Yamamoto even referred to them as transcendent warriors, a level that sets them apart from the rest entirely. We also find out that Ukitake possesses the second highest Reiatsu in Soul Society, right behind Yamamoto. The only catch? He uses a massive portion of it just to keep his illness in check. His shikai, though not overwhelming on paper, is incredibly effective, especially against high-power opponents like Ichigo or Yamamoto. If we actually knew what his Bankai was, scaling his full strength would be a lot easier. But from what we do know, his immense spiritual pressure, refined combat skills, and status, if he hadn't been held back by his illness, and if the speculation about his Bankai's strength is anywhere near accurate, Ukitake might have surpassed Shunsui. That would easily land him among the top 15 most powerful characters in all of Bleach. Now, what if I told you Gin's true intentions were hinted at all the way back in the Soul Society arc? Let's rewind. Gin confronting Ichigo and the others at the gate wasn't just random. It actually made perfect sense. With Rukia's execution closing in, Aizen couldn't afford any interference in his plan. Gin, knowing exactly what Ichigo meant to Aizen, had clear reasons to keep him alive. And when you look back, everything Gin did after that starts to line up. But the real clue came when he met Rukia on that bridge before her execution. At first, it just looked like more of his usual teasing. Then, he suddenly offered to save her and her friends. Another fake out, right? Rukia took it as an emotional trap, a way to mess with her resolve. But if you really pay attention, this was the first subtle hint at Gin's deeper motivations. He was stalling, giving Rukia a reason to fight, possibly even creating a crack in Aizen's plan. Sure, Gin has always seemed like someone who plays games with people's lives, but in that particular moment, he wasn't being cruel. He was protecting something. He didn't want Aizen to get his hands on the Hogyoku. Let's talk about one of the most legendary battles in Bleach, Ichigo versus Byakuya. A lot of fans simplify the outcome by saying Ichigo only won because of the hollow mask, but that view doesn't hold up if you look closely at the layers Kubo added. Right after activating Bankai, Ichigo could have ended the fight quickly if he was aiming to kill. Even Byakuya admitted he couldn't react to Ichigo's speed at first, and Ichigo made it clear he wasn't even going full throttle. But then, Byakuya began adapting, slowly turning the tide and gaining the upper hand. This is where the Ichigo was saved by the hollow narrative kicks in. Sure, the hollow stepped in, but only because Ichigo's body couldn't handle his own strength. His massive Reiyatsu was literally tearing him apart, slowing him down in the process. So yeah, Ichigo was stronger and faster in theory, but Byakuya had more refined combat technique. If Ichigo's body hadn't been the limiting factor, it's very possible he could have won without relying on the hollow at all. And if Byakuya had gone full force from the beginning, that fight would have been even more insane. Personally, I think Ichigo's raw speed alone gave him more than one chance to land a decisive blow. You know what's always felt off in Bleach? These three: Ririn, Kuroto, and Nova. No hate to the characters themselves, but I remember skipping the bound arc on my first watch-through, and when these three suddenly appeared, it felt like I'd missed a massive chunk of canon story. It seriously felt like you jumped into an alternate timeline. But if you check the manga, those same scenes happen, just without these three involved. The anime tried to fold them into the main narrative to boost the relevance of the bound arc, but honestly, it ended up creating more confusion than anything else. Trying to retroactively make them canon just didn't land the way it was intended. Was Uryu's Let's Still really weaker than Vollständig? We're told Vollständig is the upgraded version of Let's Steel, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's stronger in terms of raw power. Vollständig mainly solves the major drawback of Let's Steel, the fact that you lose all your powers after using it. But here's the thing. I don't think we've seen a single instance of Vollständig delivering the same kind of sudden, massive power-up we saw with Let's Steel. When Uryu used Let's Steel against Kurotsuchi, he basically went from bottom-tier lieutenant to someone who could potentially one-shot most captains, assuming he landed the hit, of course. It was a shocking leap in power, completely out of scale for his normal level. The only comparable transformation might be Ichigo's final Getsuga Tensho, which, just like Let's Steel, comes with massive risk and a heavy cost. Even the names reflect that. Vollständig means perfect or complete, the Quincy's answer to Bankai. Let's Steel translates to final form, and that perfectly describes what it is. So, it makes sense. A form that gambles everything should offer a stronger boost in return.